Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director at Word on Fire. And joining us today, as he is almost every week, is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, it is delightful to be talking with you.
Hey, Brandon. Always a joy to be on with you.
Hey, let me ask you this. I like to ask you every now and then, what are you reading these days? You in any good books?
Well, I think I mentioned last time I'm listening to Gone with the Wind. So when I'm in the car, I'm listening to this great sprawling novel. Speaking of sprawling novels, on a recent plane trip, I had this long plane trip to Ireland. I brought Anthony Burgess's book called Earthly Powers, which I read many years ago, but I stumbled on it on my bookshelf, and I thought, I'm going to bring that again on the plane. And so I've been reading that. I just finished Scott Hahn's new commentary on Romans. It's coming out in a few months, but I'm doing a blurb for it. So I just finished that. And then I just finished a number of Flannery O'Connor. I really plowed through her letters called The Habit of Being. What's right next to my bed? I got Earthly Powers is up there. And I don't know. So usually I read a number of things at the same time.
Great. Listen, today we're going to talk about 5 reasons we don't evangelize. I don't think we've really talked much about it on this show, and I'm talking about the Dave Rubin interview you did. So I don't know how many months ago that was. You were invited to be on the show of Dave Rubin. Dave's kind of, in many ways, the antithesis of you. He's a young, liberal man who's married to another man who probably disagrees with you politically and certainly religiously. He's an outspoken atheist, agnostic. But he invited you on his show to have a charitable dialogue about religion and morality. And lots of people were impressed by you in this interview. Some people described it as a masterclass in evangelization. Lots and lots of atheists were tweeting about how, they were impressed by you. Even if they didn't quite buy your arguments, they were at least intrigued by the things you were saying. However, I talked to lots of people who said, that was really great that Bishop Barron did that. He's the right guy to do that. I could never do that. And when I ask, well, what do you mean? They say, if that was me in that seat, I would just be like so nervous, so afraid. I wouldn't know what to say. And it called to mind a lot of the concerns I hear from people about why they don't evangelize, why they don't share their faith. So in this episode, I wanted to take 5 common reasons that people give that, they're not trying to escape this task. They genuinely have concerns about sharing their faith. And I'd like to get your feedback on each of them, maybe some advice on overcoming each of these barriers. So the first one, and I hear this one all the time, is that I just get too nervous when talking about my faith. How would you respond to that general objection?
Well, it's like anything else. I mean, I was nervous the first time I stepped on a basketball court trying out for a team when I was in 6th grade. I was nervous the first time I played a Little League baseball game. I was nervous the first time I got up to give a public speech in high school. So the nervousness will come to some degree from inexperience, and you just got to deal with it and do it. So go back in there and try it again. Hey, I did a lousy job. Yeah, I know. Try it again. Learn from your mistakes. So get into the arena, I suppose, is one way to respond to that. And get yourself prepared. The examples I gave there, I hadn't really planned on talking about that, but I had good coaches in every case, so I'd get out there in the court or something and make some dumb move, or I lose the basketball and all right, listen, here's what you did wrong. You weren't using your body to shield the ball. You were dribbling too high, whatever it was. Baseball, your elbow was not up high enough. And so when you're driving to the ball, you weren't hitting it right. When you were sliding, you weren't in the right. Let me show you the right position to slide. So in a similar way, I think you get in the arena with evangelization, and you're going to probably be pretty bad at it at first. But maybe get a mentor. It might be a mentor through a book, but maybe it's a personal mentor. But I think the nerves come from inexperience, and jump in the game, and you'll get better at it.
I think most people, in most cases, when they're sharing their faith with friends or family, are not going to face someone who's deeply antagonistic toward what they believe. But in your case, I'm thinking of the Dave Rubin interview. You were going in there knowing that he's probably going to differ with you on just about everything. Were you nervous going into that? How were you feeling?
A little bit. I mean, not terribly, not in a debilitating way, but sure, because I knew he had a big audience. I knew he was not, at least intellectually speaking, not a friendly audience. He was indeed a very friendly guy, and I enjoyed talking to him. But I knew that he wouldn't be in agreement with my point of view. I knew his audience would be pretty much at odds with me. So sure. One thing I do, I did it this morning before I got up to speak at the event in Orlando, is I said prayers. So I always ask the Holy Spirit. I remember at the Dave Rubin very explicitly asking the Holy Spirit to help me say the right thing and find the right words. I think of that great scene in Man for All Seasons before Thomas More goes out for his final trial, and he's kneeling there in prayer, asking God to clear his wits. So yeah, I was nervous, sure, and I prayed that I could do well.
I remember when I first became Catholic, back in 2008, maybe the first few months, first year, anytime that conversion would come up in conversation, I would always get worried that somebody would ask me something that I didn't know how to answer, didn't know how to respond. But over time, I found that one of the things that killed that nervousness for me was being familiar not only with what I believe, but being familiar with the best objections to those beliefs. And so when you go into a conversation, you kind of have this cool and breezy confidence because, I've heard the best of the best objections and I know how to respond. Is that true for you?
Yeah, that's a good point, Brandon. It just it's like, again, like baseball. Okay, I kind of know the range of pitches I'm going to face here. I kind of know the strategy of my opponent here. I've played enough basketball that I know how this game is probably going to go. So yes, in a similar way, I would say that. I mean, you and I have both been doing this for a while. There's probably very little that we haven't heard. Think of like a William Lane Craig, who's been debating atheists for the past 25 years or something. I'm quite sure there's never anything that he's not heard, that he's not responded to at some level. And that's same with teaching. When you teach an author, after a while, you've heard pretty much all the relevant objections or questions or anxieties about them. And see, if someone's starting from the outside, will say, "Oh my gosh, how does that guy know all this?" Well, it's just from a lot of experience and listening and responding. So that's true. That's where the confidence comes from.
All right, let's move on to reason number 2. So again, these are 5 reasons we don't evangelize. The first one was I just get too nervous whenever I'm talking about my faith with people. Here's the second one. I'm just not as smart or articulate as someone like Bishop Barron. I hear you, Bishop Barron, and you're so smooth and, you've read a lot of books, you got big degrees, but, I'm kind of just a simple person. I haven't taken any religion classes. I don't read a lot of books, so I can't really share my faith. What do you say to that sort of objection?
Well, at the risk of sounding self-absorbed, there's something true in it. I would acknowledge that there are certain people who become expert in an area just because of a lot of reading and background and experience and so on. And that's okay. If someone like you that's been doing this for a long time and people say, boy, that guy really has got it together. Well, all right. Yeah, he does. And he's really good at it. But it doesn't mean that I can't play at all. I guess my analogy would be maybe with golf here. I golf. I'm lousy at golf. I'm nowhere in the ballpark of even a mildly successful amateur, much less a pro. But it doesn't mean I don't play. I still get out there and I still give it my best shot and, I enjoy as far as I can. So maybe you're not at the level of an expert in apologetics or evangelization, but get the game. In fact, you might be able to reach people that I can't reach because you're speaking in a way that's more amenable to them. You're moving in their space. Maybe your relatively simple way of responding is actually more helpful to them. So I think that's okay to acknowledge certain people are quite good at it, experienced. Doesn't mean you can't do it. And also doesn't mean you can't get better at it, So I don't seem to be getting any better at golf, but I don't think you could be getting better at evangelization. Is all right. Gosh, I was really stumped on that question. When he asked me something about the Blessed Mother, it really stumped me. So, by God, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to the Catechism. I'm going to go to Aquinas. I'm going to go to whatever sources I can find, and I'm going to master that question. Okay. Next time you have a conversation, darn it, that question about the Eucharist, it kind of stumped me, All right. Now you got your next assignment, So over time, you'll get better at it.
One thing that's really helped me, and maybe this is strange and weird, I'm the only one, so you tell me, Bishop, if you've ever done this, but I sort of play out fictional scenarios in my head where, say, like the Dave Rubin interview, for example, I didn't actually do this, but I could see myself doing it, pausing after each question that Dave Rubin asks, and before hearing your answer, thinking, how would I have answered that? Because it's one thing to listen to a successful apologist or evangelist and be impressed by them, and in your head tell yourself, oh, I could give a similar answer. But if you play out the interview in your own head and put yourself in the situation, do you ever have this like a fictitious conversation thinking, well, how would I respond to that person?
Sure. Yeah. Or you just play a question in your head, and I think too of the French call it the l'esprit de l'escalier, the witticism that comes to your mind as you're leaving the party.
Right. What you should have said. Yeah.
I should have said that. Well, that's okay. Hang on to the l'esprit de l'escalier. And so, that would have been a better answer. So next time that comes up, I can use that approach. But yeah, I like the idea of study the masters, and you read a C.S. Lewis and say, okay, now how would I respond to that? Now there's Lewis. Okay, I can learn from that. But also you find your own voice too. If you're simply parroting C.S. Lewis, that's not bad. That's not a bad thing at all. But maybe you got to find your voice as an apologist, your voice as an evangelist. There's something you're going to bring to the table. I remember a very wise teacher. I was quite a young man, and I was eager to kind of get in the game. That was what I wanted to do. I want to get in the conversation. And he said to me, the most important thing is you got to find your voice. And what's your way of playing? It's again like go with sports again. You study the great players in basketball, but there's a way you're going to play the game that's really distinctive, and it's influenced. Now you can watch like a great player and say, "Oh yeah, I can see the influence of MJ," or there's the influence of Oscar. I'm dating myself now, but
James Naismith, or
yeah, not quite that old. That reminds me of Ty Cobb, but then you're going to play the game your way. I've used the analogy before of no basketball team has ever brought the court up in exactly the same way. The ball up the court in exactly the same way. Yes, there's a pattern to basketball and there's certain rules and all that, but no five-member team has ever brought the ball up the court in exactly the same way. And so no one's ever taught Christianity in exactly the same way. Karl Barth, who had tremendous reverence for the great tradition, but he said, every generation starts afresh. And I've always felt that's dead right, that every generation of Christians, of Catholics, let's say, in one way starts afresh, because there's a whole new set of issues, cultural demands, your own background, your own likes and dislikes. So you're going to bring the ball up the court in your own distinctive way. Now, you're still playing Catholicism, I hope. You're playing basketball, but in your own unique way. So find your voice as an apologist.
All right, we're looking at the 5 reasons why we don't evangelize. We've covered 2 already. First, I get too nervous when talking about the faith. Second, I'm not as smart, articulate, or as equipped as other people. How about this one, Bishop? I'm worried about offending the other person or making them feel uncomfortable. I hear this a lot from parents who want to share the Lord and share the church with their maybe adult children, but they say, anytime I bring it up, it's just going to cause bad things to happen. It'll offend the other person. What advice do you offer for this objection?
Well, I'll get your take, Brandon. I mean, you're better at this than I am, but my prejudice would be to allow the question to surface rather than to come forward in a way that will probably be seen as aggressive. Like if you're in a family setting or with friends, and hey, what do you guys think about the incarnation or something? To allow the question to emerge. Now, that means you got to have a little courage, and you got to be able to stand your ground, because if and when it does, to be able to say, yeah, okay, let's talk about that. Let me respond to that. or if, let's say, even like in a joking context, someone says something disparaging about religion or about Catholicism, to be able to say, hey, uh, there's actually a much better way to understand that, or that's really not fair to Catholicism. So maybe allowing the question to surface is the best way to do it, but also having the courage to get in the arena. But give me your take on it. You're better at this than I am.
When I think people are, when they say they're worried about offending the other person, to me, that just has the undertone of you preaching to them, you making assertions rather than, I agree with you that the style should be more of a friendly curiosity, that you're asking questions, you're pulling it out of them and opening up a dialogue. So I found that approach to be really helpful. I think also of my friend Ralph Martin, who said this. He said, "Look, think about like what's the worst case scenario in a situation like this? What's the absolute worst thing that can happen? They might get angry. That's bad. You might ruin a relationship. That's pretty bad. They might get so mad that they beat you or perhaps even kill you. That would probably be the worst case scenario. Even then, you'd end up a martyr." And so he said, even the worst case scenario you could possibly imagine, which would probably never happen, isn't that bad at the end of the day. And there'll always be another chance, always another conversation. Usually it's not one conversation's the final word. So all that advice has been helpful to me, I think.
Yeah, and to do it always in that friendly way. I think you're so good at that in your own work and apologetics. I'm not as good at that. I think I get sort of
No,
worked
you
up.
are. If you go to your YouTube comments, you always start off with "hello, friend," and then you
Yeah,
kind of go from there.
that's on purpose. And at times I think I probably lose my temper with people, but I think that's very important that you do it always in this friendly way. That we're kind of together with curiosity looking into this question. Um, I think that's a better approach.
But there are, and you've said this before, that our Lord says that we have to be willing to lose some things we love, friends, family, positions of honor and power. There are times when speaking the truth might come at great cost. Isn't that right?
Yeah, quite right. And you're right. That's the detachment, the spiritual detachment that's needed for this kind of work. I can actually, I don't think I said it today when I was speaking with the Orlando group, but Pope Francis talks about the margins a lot, right? The peripheria. But right in the beginning, he talked about the existential peripheries. So we tend to read him almost exclusively as talking about economic people who are poor and on the margins of society, and that's true. But he said the existential peripheries, and that means people who are alienated from God, people who have bad religious ideas, and we got to be willing to be missionaries to that world. So just as being a missionary in the world of the economic periphery will cost you, so this will cost you. And you're right. It might cost you a job. It might cost you a reputation. It might cost you friendships. But you got to have the detachment to say, Lord, whether I have this friend or not, whether I'm, successful in the eyes of the world or not, I'm going to do what I think is your will. So, yeah, that's a very important point.
Let's move on now. We're looking at 5 reasons we don't evangelize. We've done 3. Now we're moving to reason 4, and I'm a little hesitant to mention this one because I think it's going to boil your blood. But this objection says that religion is just a private thing. We should just keep our religious and moral views to ourselves. What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a very common view in the modern world, in our American culture, and that's what the dominant secular culture wants to do. It wants to privatize religion. So it's like a hobby. If I have a little hobby, I'm into chess or something, well, I'm not going to shove it down your throat. And I'd be sort of obnoxious if I were, maybe gently sharing my enthusiasm. But if I'm out there publicly expecting you now to become as much of a chess enthusiast as I am, well, then people will naturally react to that and say, well, come on, man, you're bringing your private stuff out in public. So if religion is just like that, it's like a little hobby that you and your friends share. It's grand. It's great for all of you. But don't expect me to take it seriously. But see, that's repugnant to the Bible. It just is not what we mean by religion in a biblical context. If God is the source of the being of the entire world, God's the creator of all things, God is the unconditioned ground of all conditioned reality, that means God has to do with everything, that God can't be sequestered in the private realm alone. Of course, the faith has public implications. And it's been true from St. Paul on. All of our great people would say that. So we have to resist the sort of forced etiquette of the secular society that would compel us to privatize the faith. We come forward in the public arena. Now we come forward in love and in peace and in nonviolence and all those good things. So God knows there's a terrible history around hyper-aggressive religion, even persecutorial religion. That is not the way. But the alternative is not privatization. It's a bold, confident, but nonviolent public assertion of the faith. And that's the space we should be in. You want an example of Martin Luther King in our country, John Paul II. I mean, two great examples of people that brought the faith very vibrantly into the public arena and did so, I think, in a way that was nonviolent, but it was powerful.
I find, and tell me if you agree with this, that people aren't absolutely against public religion. So, for example, many Americans would not say about Martin Luther King, "Oh, I wish he would have been more private about his faith. He was too outspoken about the Bible and religious laws." It's usually only in regards to certain specific issues that they want to be privatized. Do you sense that too?
Yeah, because King, although there were people at the time that would have said just that, but I think you're right in suggesting that the sexual issues are what sort of preoccupy people on the score, and that is a private matter, and that the policing or repression of sexual desire will lead almost inevitably to deep unhappiness, which I think is a Freudian influence, which is now so deep in the culture that we hardly avert to it, that we're convinced that any restriction to the sexual impulse is going to make us deeply unhappy, even to the point of suicide. And so don't get in the way of anyone's sexual expression. Even 40, 50 years ago, people wouldn't have held that, but almost everyone holds that now, seems to me. And that's where they'd say, look, keep your hands out of my private life, and that's none of your business. Now, again, this raises all kinds of issues. As Aquinas argued, not everything that's immoral should be illegal. So when we talk about public religion, we don't mean necessarily that now we're legislating our whole moral agenda, because that's not recommended. What it means, though, I think, is that we can make the claim in the public arena for the Christian faith, and we can allow Christian values to influence our public consensus.
One more thing on this point, that there's a hidden assumption behind the view that we should just keep religious and moral views private, that these things are just subjective, that there's no objective truths regarding religion and morality. And in particular, you've been really good on this, that when we're trying to share our faith, we're giving somebody something objective that's good for them. We're not trying to just get them to believe the right things. We're trying to share things that will objectively lead to their flourishing. Do you find that many times when we want to privatize our faith, it's because we're not really convinced that our views will help the other person anyway? We don't have anything to offer them.
Yeah, I think so. And the main thing is to allow space for a public argument. So I mean, I'm not calling for a Catholic theocracy in our country. What I would like, though, is a public space where religious argument is allowed. And okay, it's a free country. I get it. Someone can say, I think that's for the birds. I'm not going to support that. All right. It's a democracy. It's a free country. I don't want a theocracy. If we could have one, I wouldn't want one. But I'd like a public space that is not so tyrannized by secularism that you can't make a boldly religious argument. What a lot of us worry about today is, in ways both direct and indirect, in ways both overt and clandestine, the society seems to be moving in that direction. That even to raise the religious issue publicly is now offensive. It's proscribed. That's what makes a lot of us nervous, that it's a creeping tyranny of the secular state. Cardinal George referred to the smiling face of liberal totalitarianism. And that's what he meant, it's a totalitarianism, that the sort of, call it liberal consensus about everything, is now imposed in a totalitarian way. And that's where the call for religious liberty that the bishops have felt so strongly about, that's where it comes into play.
So we're talking about 5 reasons why we don't evangelize, 5 objections as to why we don't share our faith more often. Reason 1 was we're too nervous. Reason 2 was we're not smart, articulate, or prepared enough. Reason 3 is we're worried about offending the other person or making them feel uncomfortable. And reason 4 is that, well, we should just keep our religious and moral views to ourselves. Let's look at a final objection. I see this attitude a lot among my friends, that there's sort of a defeated, hopeless attitude that sharing my faith just won't have any impact anyways. I mean, the other person will just dismiss whatever I say, so it's not really worth talking about my faith. How do you respond to that sort of despair?
Well, I guess there I'd apply Teresa of Calcutta's famous line that we're not called upon to be successful, but to be faithful. I don't know. Will it have the effect? When I started doing this work years ago on the internet, I didn't know. I mean, quite honestly, I had no idea. We start with the YouTube videos, and I'm writing books and articles, and then the social media. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to have an effect. It has indeed had an effect, thank God. But I don't think we should be inordinately concerned about that, the success of it. Do it. If you intuit that the Lord has given you this call, follow it. Let him worry about success. You are called upon to be faithful to the call. And the call to evangelize is perennial. It's a mark of the church from the very beginning. So I would say do it and don't worry about success. It's like Fulton Sheen when the young priest said, "Hey, I've already got 17 converts. How many do you have?" And Sheen said, "Stop counting them." Don't worry about that. Don't worry about success. Leave that up to God. You do what the Lord's calling you to do.
I learned a great lesson in this regard from William Lane Craig. We mentioned him earlier. He travels the country debating all these atheists and skeptics, and he knows with great assurance going into these debates that he's probably not going to convert the person on stage with him. So in that sense, the impact, if that's what you're measuring the success against, is pretty low. However, he said, the reason I do these things is not because I think I'm going to impact the other person on stage, but because there's hundreds of college students sitting on the fence in the audience wondering, which view is right. And I've seen that with my friends, and I try to encourage them. Like, you might feel like, for example, if a friend or family member posts something on Facebook and you feel this sense that maybe I should respond or say something, but you're worried it won't affect their views at all. But there are hundreds or thousands of people who might read that little exchange and see the way that you handle yourself. Is that true for you?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You never know. You sow the seed and you don't know where it lands or how it lands. That's the beauty of the Lord's parable. That's why up in my room I've got a reproduction of Van Gogh's The Sower, because I love it as a picture, but also it's of great thematic importance for me that a lot of my work is that. It's just sowing the seed. Where does it land? I don't know. That's not my job to worry about. I sow it on rocky soil. I sow it in good soil. I sow it. Leave it up to God now how that works. We shouldn't worry about it inordinately. Just do it. Just do it.
Let's close with a simple question here, Bishop. Why should Catholics evangelize?
Because it's essential to Christian faith. The Christian faith grows by being given away. By its nature, we're a missionary religion. Go and preach to all nations, right? So it's the prophetic call that every baptized person has. Christianity, by its very nature, is a missionary faith. And so we can't just rest in our private enjoyment of the faith. We're meant by our baptismal call to spread it.
Well, it's time now for our question from one of our listeners. Today we have a question from George in the land down under. He's asking how we can evangelize the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, in our everyday life. So here's George's question.
Hi Bishop Barron, my name is George and I'm from Sydney, Australia. My question is regarding the release of the census data here, where it was shown that 30% of the population now align themselves in the no religion category, and I know you've been very vocal about this issue in the United States for a while. I'm a medical student and I deal with this kind of resistance to the faith on a daily basis. I was wondering, what kind of advice would you have to the youth on how to tackle this issue in our everyday setting? Thank you and God bless.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brandon. You should chime in too here. I just read that survey. I think that showed the 30% figure. It's 25 in our country, right? That would no religion. So they're terrible stats. I mean, from a evangelical standpoint, we should all be upset about that, and especially among the young. In our country, isn't it 50% of Catholics under 30 claim to be nuns? So it's a huge task, and you're right in raising that question. Here's my first reaction. So you're a medical student. I think I was gathering from your question. Simply your personal witness in that environment. Let people know, not aggressively, but let them know that you're a Catholic. And somebody tells me that would allow questions to surface. You know what I'm saying? They look at you and say, he's a smart guy. You know, he's a medical student. He's certainly taken full advantage of secular academe and so on. And yet he's also a man of faith. What gives? How do you explain that? And I bet not in an aggressive way, but I bet questions would rather naturally emerge at that point. So your very witness, let them know in some, maybe an indirect way, but let them know that you're a Catholic. And I think that would allow questions to emerge. And that's my general remark is as I said before, let the question emerge rather than going after them, you know. And when they do, be ready to give a reason for the hope that's in you, as we hear in 1 Peter, right? So read up, just as you're reading in anatomy and biology and everything else. Read up on. Start with the Catechism. Move into C.S. Lewis. Watch the videos of William Lane Craig. Go on Brandon's website. Strange Notions, you know. So, but I think your own personal witness maybe is the first thing. But Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd echo everything you just said. One thing at this big USCCB convocation that we just had in Orlando, there was a lot of talk about the nuns and how to address them. And somebody, I forgot who, made this perceptive point that most of the nuns still believe in God. They still have some vague spiritual life. Some of them even still pray. But why they call themselves nun is because they don't identify with a religion, in particular the church. And so I think when engaging nuns, it's helpful to in some way show why the church, not just God in particular or spirituality, but how the church is beneficial to your life, how the sacraments help you flourish, how they make an impact on your life. So I think that'd be a good approach.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? That's a hard question. The anti-institutionalism and then the fact that we've had so much corruption, sadly, within the institution has obviously not helped. But that's a good point.
Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Word on Fire show. I hope you overcame some of your own objections to evangelizing. Of course, if you go to wordonfireshow.com, you'll find all of the past episodes from this show, including other episodes on evangelization with some great tips and advice. One more thing, I mentioned last episode, we have a special coupon code for you, only for you. If you're listening to this show, you can use the coupon code DAVID to save $10 on Bishop Barron's upcoming film series called David the King. Just go to davidtheking.com and use the coupon code DAVID, and you'll save $10 on the David the King DVD or Blu-ray. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.